She believed no one would marry her, until a human veteran answered. Sarathalan stood alone at the wide crystal window of the conquered habitat ring, watching distant stars drift past like slow thoughts she could not silence. The station moved smoothly through space, but inside her chest everything felt heavy and still. Around her, the great city continued as it always did, voices echoing softly, energy lights pulsing, diplomats and traders passing without a second glance. None of them looked at her for long. Most did not look at her at all. She understood why. Her species, the Velari, valued balance and symmetry above all else. They believed the body was a reflection of the soul, and damage to one meant damage to the other. Sarathalan had once been considered beautiful by Velari standards, tall, elegant, her four arms moving in perfect harmony, her silver-blue skin smooth and unbroken. That had been before the war. The war against the machine fleets had taken many things from the galaxy, but from Sarathalan it had taken something more personal. One arm had been badly damaged and replaced with a functional but obvious synthetic limb. Fine fracture lines crossed her chest where armor had failed. One of her eyes no longer reflected light the same way, giving her gaze an uneven glow. She was still alive. She had still won battles. She had still saved lives, but none of that mattered now. In Velari society, survivors like her were honored in words and avoided in action. She was praised in public ceremonies and quietly removed from private invitations. Marriage proposals that once arrived regularly had stopped completely. Even professional partnerships became rare. No one said it openly, but everyone believed the same thing. She was no longer suitable. Behind her, a soft tone sounded. The station's public terminal had finished processing her request. Sarathalan turned slowly and faced the glowing panel. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the polished surface, uneven, altered, real. She straightened her posture the way she had learned to do in the military and read the text carefully. Marriage registry submission, complete. Status, open. Visibility, interstellar. Her lower hands trembled slightly. She folded them together to steady herself. The Concord's open marriage registry was not meant for people like her. It was mostly used by minor houses, remote species, or those seeking political connections. Submitting a request without status backing or physical suitability was considered embarrassing. Some called it desperate. Sarathalan had waited many cycles before reaching this point. She had told herself she did not need companionship, that service and duty were enough. But silence had a way of growing louder with time. She did not expect an answer. She turned away from the terminal and left the public hall, moving through quieter corridors toward her assigned quarters. Along the way, she passed a group of Velari diplomats. They paused in conversation when they noticed her, offering polite nods that did not reach their eyes. One of them glanced briefly at her synthetic arm and then looked away too quickly. She kept walking. Inside her quarters, the lights adjusted to her presence, casting soft hues across clean, orderly space. Military discipline still guided her habits. Everything had a place. Everything was controlled, except her thoughts. She sat on the edge of her rest platform and allowed herself a long breath. She told herself she had done nothing wrong. She had survived. She had served. She had followed every rule given to her. Still, the feeling remained that by surviving she had failed in some invisible way. Cycles passed. The registry remained open. At first, she checked it every rest period, telling herself it was only practical, then less often. Eventually, she stopped looking altogether. The silence confirmed what she already knew. Until one cycle, the terminal chimed. The sound was so unexpected that she froze. The chime repeated, gentle but persistent. Her heart began to race as she crossed the room and activated the panel. For a moment she feared it was a system error or an automated message. It was neither. Marriage registry update, response received. Origin species, human. Human, she had met humans during the war, briefly. They were new to the interstellar stage at the time, physically fragile compared to many species, short-lived but relentless in ways few understood. They fought differently. They bonded quickly. They mourned openly. They were unpredictable, and one of them had answered her request. Her first instinct was disbelief. Her second was suspicion. Humans were known for curiosity. Perhaps this was a mistake, or worse, a misunderstanding. She opened the attached profile. Elias Ward was older by human standards. His record showed prior military service during humanity's first interstellar conflict, including joint operations with the Velari. He was listed as retired, residing on a low-population agricultural colony. No noble ties. No political influence. No visible advantages. A single message accompanied the formal response. I saw your request. I don't think anyone should have to ask the universe to care and get silence back. If you're willing, I'd like to speak. That was all. No praise, no apology. No mention of her injuries. Sarathalin read it again, and again. Her mind searched for hidden meanings and found none. The simplicity unsettled her more than any insult could have. She closed the panel and stepped back, pressing one hand lightly against her chest. Her thoughts spiraled. Why would a human answer? What did he expect? What would happen if she met him and confirmed what everyone else already believed, that she was unworthy? Yet another thought followed, quieter but stronger. What if he did not see her that way? Against every instinct for self-protection, she sent a reply agreeing to a meeting. Protocol suggested a neutral location within conquered space. He accepted immediately, as if he had been waiting. The days before the meeting passed slowly. News traveled fast through diplomatic circles. Whispers followed her through halls. A Velari forming a bond with a human was unusual enough. One with her condition was something else entirely. Some pitied her. Some mocked her quietly. Others watched with interest as though she were an experiment. She ignored them all. On the day of the meeting, Sarathalin stood once more in a public hall, this one overlooking a docking bay. She wore formal attire that concealed nothing and softened nothing. If she was to be judged, she would be judged as she was. The docking lights shifted as a transport vessel arrived. The markings identified it as human-made, practical, unadorned, efficient. The hatch opened. A single human stepped out. He was not tall by Velari standards. His movements were careful, balanced. His hair showed streaks of gray. One leg bore a slight mechanical stiffness when he walked. Like her, he carried the marks of survival openly. Elias Ward paused at the base of the ramp, scanning the hall. When his eyes met hers, he smiled, not widely, not nervously, but with calm recognition. He approached without hesitation. Sarathalin felt her breath catch. She waited for the familiar reaction, the brief stare, the quick look away, the subtle tightening of discomfort. It did not come. Elias stopped at a respectful distance and inclined his head slightly, mimicking the Velari greeting he had clearly studied. "Sarathalin," he said carefully, "thank you for meeting me." His voice held no strain, no judgment. "You answered my request," she replied, her tone formal, controlled. "You understand its nature." "Yes," he said, "I read everything, including the parts that made others turn away," she thought. They stood there for a moment, two veterans from different worlds, surrounded by a galaxy that expected something to go wrong. Elias gestured lightly toward the seating area nearby. "Would it be all right if we talked?" She hesitated only a second before nodding. As they walked side by side, Sarathalin became aware of how closely the Conquered was watching. Observers pretended not to stare. She felt exposed in a way battlefields had never made her feel. They sat. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Elias said, "I want to be clear. I didn't answer because I thought you needed saving." Her gaze sharpened slightly. "I answered because I recognized the silence." She studied him carefully. "Explain." "When I left the service," he said, "everything that told me who I was disappeared overnight. Uniform, orders, purpose, People thanked me and moved on. I didn't know how to ask for connection without feeling like a burden. He met her eyes steadily. Your request didn't sound like weakness. It sounded like honesty. Something inside her shifted, slow and painful, like a wound being cleaned. You have seen my record, she said. You know what I am. I know what you survived, he replied. That matters more to me. For the first time in many cycles, Sarathalin felt something unfamiliar rising in her chest. Hope. And somewhere in the great conquered station, unseen forces began to take notice, because a human had done something no one else had dared. He had answered. Sarathalin did not sleep well after the meeting. She lay on her rest platform, staring at the soft glow of the ceiling, replaying every moment again and again. The way Elias had spoken, the way he had looked at her without hesitation, the calm in his voice. None of it fit into the pattern she knew. Her mind kept searching for reasons. Humans were known for kindness, yes, but kindness did not usually cross species lines so easily. And yet, nothing about Elias had felt false. If anything, he seemed as cautious as she was. By the next cycle, the conquered had already begun to react. News feeds spoke quietly at first, then louder. A Velari War veteran considering a union with a human civilian. Analysts debated compatibility, lifespan differences, cultural risks. Comment sections filled with opinions from species that had never fought beside either of them. Sarathalin tried to ignore it, but it followed her everywhere. In the diplomatic halls, conversations stopped when she passed. Some faces showed curiosity, others showed concern. A few showed something close to disappointment, as if she had broken an unspoken rule by trying again. Elias, meanwhile, remained in his assigned guest quarters. Protocol required several supervised meetings before any further steps. The Conquered called it compatibility assessment. To Sarathalin, it felt like judgment. Their second meeting took place in a shared cultural space designed to be neutral. Soft lighting, adaptive gravity, seating that adjusted automatically for different species. Elias arrived early. He stood near one of the transparent walls, watching the station's artificial horizon curve slowly below. When Sarathalin entered, he turned at once. I wasn't sure how early was too early, he said, offering a small smile. You arrived within acceptable parameters, she replied. Then after a pause she added, early is not a fault. He nodded. Good, I tend to prefer it. They sat again, closer this time, though still with respectful distance. A conquered observer stood nearby, pretending to focus on a data tablet while clearly listening to everything. Sarathalin felt tension tighten in her shoulders. Elias noticed. They always do this, he asked quietly. Yes, she said. Every word may be evaluated. He considered that, then leaned back slightly. Then I guess we should just be honest. Her upper eyes narrowed slightly, a Velari expression of curiosity. Honesty is rarely encouraged in these settings. Still worth trying, he replied. The conversation began carefully. They spoke of neutral things first. Her work before the war, his colony world where days were long and quiet and the soil needed patience. He described growing food not for profit but for stability. It's strange, he said. After years of destruction, helping things grow felt right. She understood that more than she expected. When the topic turned to the war, neither avoided it but neither rushed it either. You fought alongside Velari units, she said. Yes, Elias replied. Different command styles. Yours were precise, ours were flexible. That is one word for it, she said, and surprised herself by letting out a soft breath that passed for laughter. The observer glanced up, clearly noting the reaction. Elias noticed and lowered his voice. If this is too much pressure, we can stop. Sarathalin shook her head. No, pressure is familiar. What was unfamiliar was the way she felt less alone under it. As meetings continued over the following cycles, patterns formed. They spoke easily. Not perfectly, but honestly. Elias asked questions without fear of offense. Sarathalin answered without hiding. Once, during a walk through the station's arboretum, her damaged arm seized briefly from old nerve pain. She stopped moving, breath sharp, instincts flaring. Before she could speak, Elia slowed and matched her pace without touching her. "Do you need a moment?" he asked, not alarmed, not embarrassed. "Yes," she said quietly. They stood among artificial trees, leaves glowing faintly with biolight. No one stared. Elias positioned himself so others would walk past without crowding her. He said nothing until she straightened again. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For not making it an event." He shrugged slightly. "Pain doesn't need an audience." That moment spread through her thoughts long after. Not everyone approved. A senior Velari official requested a private meeting. The room was formal, filled with symbols of tradition and continuity. "You are aware," the official said carefully, "that this union will reflect on our people." Sarathalin met their gaze steadily. "I am aware it reflects on me." "The human is suitable, perhaps," the official continued, "but expectations must be managed. Your condition already limits perception." "My condition saved lives," Sarathalin replied, her voice calm but firm. The official hesitated. "That is not in question." "It should be," she said. "Every time someone looks at me and sees loss instead of survival." The meeting ended without resolution, but something had shifted. She did not leave feeling smaller. Elias faced pressure of his own. Messages from his home colony arrived, filled with concern and confusion. Some friends supported him. Others warned him that interspecies bonds rarely ended well. Differences in lifespan alone were enough to bring pain. He read them all and answered none. Instead, he sent one message back to Sarathalin. "I know people are watching. If you want to stop, say so. I won't think less of you." She stared at the words for a long time before replying. "I do not want to stop." Their next evaluation was public, a cultural exchange ceremony meant to test shared values. It involved symbolic gestures from both species, spoken commitments, and physical coordination. For Sarathalin, it was difficult. The movements required symmetry she no longer fully had. She hesitated before stepping forward. Elias noticed immediately. "We can adapt," he said quietly. "The ceremony is fixed," the facilitator replied. Elias looked at Sarathalin. "Then I'll adapt." When the movement began, he adjusted his steps to match hers. When her damaged arm moved slower, he slowed too. The ceremony lost its perfect form but gained something else. The audience murmured. Some looked uncomfortable. Others leaned forward, watching closely. When it ended, silence filled the chamber. The facilitator cleared their throat. The exchange deviated from standard parameters. "Yes," Elias said, "because we're not standard." Sarathalin felt her chest tighten, not with pain but with emotion she struggled to name. That night, alone again in her quarters, she finally allowed herself to feel it fully. She was afraid. Afraid this would be taken from her. Afraid hope would cost more than she could afford. Afraid that believing in this would hurt more than isolation ever had. But she was also tired of hiding. The next cycle, a notice arrived from the Concord Council. Further evaluation required. Public scrutiny elevated. Final decision pending. Sarathalin stood at the window once more, stars drifting silently past. This time she was not alone. Elias stood beside her, hands resting at his sides, posture relaxed but ready. "Whatever happens," he said, "I don't regret answering." She turned to him, her uneven gaze steady. "Nor do I," she said. And somewhere deep within the Concord, old rules began to strain. Because what was happening between them did not fit neatly into tradition, fear, or expectation. It fit something far more dangerous. Choice. The Concord Council's notice had arrived quietly, but the effect on Sarathalin was anything but quiet. The message carried with it an unspoken weight. Every movement, every word, every gesture between her and Elias would now be examined more closely than ever. The council had made it clear that while the union was not immediately forbidden, The evaluation would determine whether it could continue. It was, in effect, a test not only of them as individuals, but of humanity itself. Sarathalin walked through the halls of the station with an awareness she had never experienced before. Every diplomat's glance, every whisper, even the mechanical hum of automated doors, seemed loaded with judgment. The observers were subtle but relentless. She adjusted her pace, her posture, and the way her synthetic arm moved. Each action was a small measure of control in a galaxy that had always seen her as lacking it. Elias, by contrast, remained calm. His steps did not falter, his presence did not waver. When he walked beside her, it was as if he carried a buffer against the scrutiny, a shield made of quiet human resolve. His eyes, steady and unwavering, occasionally met hers, and each time a small spark of confidence returned to her chest. He did not bow to pressure. He ignored it, not out of defiance, but out of understanding that it had no power over him unless he allowed it. Their first public assessment began in a ceremonial hall built to impress, not comfort. It was vast, with ceilings so high they seemed to disappear into nothingness, and floors that reflected light like still water. The chamber was filled with representatives of multiple species, some of whom had never seen a human in person, much less interacting intimately with a Velari. Sarathalin could feel the collective gaze on her, as though each observer carried a silent question. Can she be enough? Can he accept her as she is? She forced her shoulders back, reminding herself that she had survived worse: battlefields, starvation, machine fleets, but nothing had prepared her for this kind of scrutiny. Elias moved at her side, naturally and without hesitation. He did not offer advice or commentary, but his presence alone provided reassurance. He did not need to speak. His calm, unshakable acceptance reminded her that the only approval that truly mattered was their own. The test itself was designed to measure compatibility through coordinated tasks and mutual problem-solving. For most species, it was simple: symmetrical patterns, shared rituals, and synchronized movements. For Sarathalin, it was not. The injuries she had sustained during the war, along with the synthetic limb and uneven gait, made perfection impossible. She expected judgment to follow, but Elias did not falter. He adapted. When the first challenge began, they were asked to move through a series of obstacles that required precise timing and alignment. Others moved flawlessly, their limbs tracing perfect patterns. Sarathalin knew she would not match them. She braced herself for ridicule. Instead, Elias adjusted to her pace. When her steps were slightly off, he slowed. When her arm moved unevenly, he mirrored it with patience. Together, they completed the task not with perfection but with harmony. It was subtle, but the difference was striking. Observers leaned forward, some out of curiosity, others in disbelief. A few whispered, noting how human adaptability compensated for what many species considered a flaw. The next challenge was one of communication and empathy. Participants were asked to guide each other blindfolded, relying solely on touch, sound, and intuition. Sarathalin felt her chest tighten. This was always the hardest. Humans relied heavily on voice and sight, while Velari placed great value on subtle physical cues. Misinterpretation could be disastrous. Elias placed his hand lightly on hers. "We will go slowly," he said. His tone was calm, confident. "Trust me." She nodded, heart pounding. They began. His hand guided her subtly, adjusting without overcompensating. When she faltered, he did not scold or express impatience. Instead, he offered a gentle correction, an acknowledgement of effort rather than an expectation of perfection. By the end of the exercise, not only had they succeeded, but something more profound had emerged: a visible sense of connection that transcended protocol. Observers who had come expecting awkwardness, mistakes, or failure instead saw two beings working in unison, adapting to each other in ways that no rigid system could measure. After the public challenges, They were led to a private space for discussion and reflection. Elias leaned back in a simple chair, eyes scanning the ceiling thoughtfully. Sarathalin perched beside him, aware that even in privacy, the pressure lingered, not from the room, but from the knowledge that the galaxy was watching. "Do they always look so concerned?" she asked quietly. Elias shrugged. "When something challenges their expectations, yes. Most species prefer patterns. Humans are less predictable, and apparently so is your kind." She allowed herself a small laugh, the first in many cycles. "Less predictable indeed, and yet I cannot tell if it is relief or judgment." "Both," he said simply. "Some are curious, some are afraid. It is easier to control their fear than their curiosity." They spoke for hours, discussing philosophy, survival, and human adaptability. Elias did not lecture, he shared. He did not insist, he proposed. The conversation carried them through concerns of the past and hopes for the future. Sarathalin began to feel that for the first time, someone understood the way she had lived, not in spite of her injuries, but because of them. Their connection deepened further during a station-wide event meant to honor war heroes. Though Sarathalin had received commendations, she was used to attending alone, shielded by protocol. This time, Elias walked beside her openly. When other diplomats whispered, he made no attempt to silence them. He simply stood firm, demonstrating that her worth was not diminished by scrutiny, and his choice to accompany her was deliberate, visible, and unshakable. Sarathalin noticed subtle changes among the observers. Some began to lean in with genuine interest rather than judgment. A few younger diplomats whispered cautiously about human qualities, loyalty, courage, and adaptability. It was not a revolution, not yet, but small cracks were appearing in long-held assumptions. When the event ended, they returned to their quarters. Sarathalin was quiet, still processing the day's events. Elias, on the other hand, seemed entirely unaffected by the attention. "You make it look easier than it is," she said softly. "I make it look easier because I believe it is," he replied. "Not because it is easy. Because it matters more than their opinions." Her chest tightened. That was a truth she had not heard in years. Survival had taught her to fear, to calculate, to protect herself from the judgment of others. Elias' words reminded her that there were forces stronger than fear: choice, trust, and shared purpose. Over the following cycles, their meetings continued, each test more challenging than the last. They navigated complex cultural rituals, debated philosophical dilemmas, and faced scenarios that required them to make decisions with moral weight. Each time, Elias adapted to Sarathalin's strengths and weaknesses, and each time, observers began to notice patterns that transcended the expected norms. At one point, they were asked to participate in a joint negotiation exercise. Their task was to mediate a hypothetical dispute between two minor species. Most participants relied heavily on tradition, hierarchy, and rigid protocols. Sarathalin and Elias approached the problem differently. "Listen first," Elias advised, "before thinking about rules. Understand needs, then find solutions." She followed, observing how he framed questions, how he acknowledged every perspective, how he remained patient in moments when others demanded immediate answers. Together, they guided the discussion to a resolution that balanced logic, empathy, and practicality. The exercise concluded not only successfully, but elegantly. The observers' notes, visible to them afterward, were filled with words like unexpected, effective, and innovative. Despite the progress, not all was smooth. Some factions of the conquered remained skeptical. A senior Velari official privately warned Sarathalin that humans were new to interstellar politics, that they lacked understanding of complex societal structures, and that relying on a human could lead to embarrassment or scandal. Sarathalin considered the warning carefully. "Perhaps," she said finally, "but I see strength in his differences. Perhaps it is not conformity that saves us but adaptability." Elias noticed her thoughtful tone. "I've learned that strength comes in many forms," he said. "Sometimes it is quiet, sometimes it is loud. Sometimes it is about surviving. Sometimes it is about caring enough to act when others won't." Her chest warmed with a feeling she had not recognized in years: admiration. Not the polite admiration that Velari expected from soldiers or diplomats. Not the admiration born of fear or obligation. True admiration born of recognition. She saw in him a reflection of the kind of courage she had long forgotten she could respect, courage tempered by empathy, steadiness, and unshakable choice. One evening, as the artificial night fell over the conquered station, they walked along the observation deck. The stars stretched infinitely before them, but it was the closeness of another living being that captured Sarythalen's attention. Elias spoke quietly about his homeworld, about nights where the sky was not covered by city lights, about quiet winds and the taste of soil rich with life. She listened, fascinated not only by his words, but by the calm certainty in which he spoke them. "Do you ever regret your service?" she asked, breaking the silence. He paused. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But I have learned that regret does not erase what we gain. It only teaches us what we value. And I value the people I choose to stand beside. That includes you." Her heart skipped a beat. She had expected pity, fear, caution, but not this. Not the clarity, not the unwavering choice that flowed through his words like light through the artificial canopy above. The galaxy watched. Observers documented every step, every gesture, every conversation. Some looked for flaws. Others noted patterns that might signal innovation. But for the first time in her life, Sarythalen felt the weight of judgment lessen. The human beside her was proof that not all rules were universal, not all eyes were cruel, and not all expectations were binding. And somewhere deep in the bureaucracy of the conquered, analysts began to note a startling trend. When humans chose, they chose fully. When they adapted, they reshaped expectations. When they stood beside another, they did so without hesitation. Sarythalen's belief that she would always be overlooked began to waver. Perhaps survival, scars, and history were not limitations. They were evidence of endurance. Perhaps being human in judgment and human in empathy could change more than a single pair of lives. That night, as she prepared to rest, she received a brief message from Elias. "Tomorrow they will watch closely. Do not fear. We adapt. We endure. We choose." She smiled. The first true, unguarded smile in many cycles. For the first time in years, she believed that a life worth living might still exist beyond judgment, beyond expectation, beyond fear. And she knew, without doubt, that she would face it not alone, but with a human who had already chosen her, without hesitation, without pity, and without condition. The next cycle brought the most intense scrutiny Sarythalen and Elias had yet experienced. The conquered council had announced that their relationship would be observed in a series of formal evaluations, public and private. Every moment would be watched, recorded, and assessed. Representatives from multiple species arrived in the ceremonial hall, their expressions a mix of curiosity, skepticism, and barely concealed amusement. For many, this was entertainment, a test of whether a human could truly keep pace with a Velari, and whether a Velari could accept the unconventional ways of a human. Sarythalen entered the hall with a steady gait, her synthetic arm moving in precise coordination, though she knew some observers would focus only on what was imperfect. Elias followed closely, his posture calm, his eyes scanning the room but never wavering from her presence. Together, they moved like two forces in quiet harmony, aware that the eyes of the galaxy were upon them. The first challenge of the day was diplomatic reasoning. They were presented with a hypothetical dispute between two species, each claiming the same resource. The scenario was designed to test cultural sensitivity, negotiation skills, and problem-solving under pressure. Participants were expected to follow strict protocols, referencing precedent and adhering to rigid rules. Deviations could result in failure or public embarrassment. Elias looked at Sarithalin. "We approach it together as equals," he said softly, "not as competitors." She nodded, her heart tightening. She was used to strategy and analysis, but humans approached problems differently. They focused less on tradition and more on empathy, less on precedent and more on outcomes. For the first few moments, she hesitated, measuring the room, the observers, and the stakes. Then she let herself trust him. They spoke to the representatives patiently, listening to complaints, asking questions to clarify needs, and identifying shared interests. Where others argued loudly or attempted to dominate, they guided subtly, ensuring every voice was acknowledged. The result was an unexpected compromise, creative and fair, that left many observers murmuring in disbelief. Some even nodded appreciatively. The second challenge was physical coordination. They were asked to navigate a complex simulation of a rescue operation, requiring agility, timing, and communication. Sarithalin braced herself. Her synthetic limb and injuries made certain movements slower or uneven. The expectation was that she would struggle and fail. Elias did not allow that to happen. He adjusted his pace, his timing, and even his method of communication to suit her strengths. When a part of the simulation required lifting or supporting weight, he took more of the burden without calling attention to it. When she faltered, he spoke calmly, guiding her without patronizing. Together they moved fluidly, completing the task not perfectly, but successfully. Observers recorded every step. Some were impressed, some skeptical, but none could deny the effectiveness of their cooperation. Afterward, they were taken to a private chamber, where the council's senior advisors asked pointed questions. Some were respectful, others subtly probing, attempting to unsettle them. One Velari diplomat leaned forward, eyes sharp. "Your bond is unusual," the diplomat said. "Your methods diverge from protocol. How do you expect this to succeed in the broader society?" Elias replied evenly. "We succeed by understanding each other. Protocol does not measure understanding or commitment." Sarithalin added, her voice calm but firm, "Success is not perfection. It is adaptation, trust, and perseverance. If those qualities fail, no tradition can save you." The room went silent. Some observers shifted uncomfortably. They had expected deference or apology, not clarity and quiet authority. Over the next few cycles, public appearances became more frequent. Every gesture, every conversation, every movement was monitored. While some speculated that the human would falter, the reality was that he thrived under pressure. Elias did not act as though he belonged. He simply did, and in doing so, he demonstrated a quality that few in the galaxy understood: human courage. In one particularly tense ceremony, they were required to perform a shared ritual meant to symbolize mutual respect and alignment. Most pairs approached the ritual with mechanical precision, following every step exactly. Sarithalin and Elias approached differently. When the first steps required synchronized movements that were difficult for her injured arm, he adjusted his motions to match hers. When the timing of the steps threatened to throw them off, he slowed, allowing her to keep pace. The ritual, while imperfect in execution, radiated authenticity. Observers noticed, some frowning initially, but gradually many leaned in with curiosity. Afterward, as they walked through the corridors in a quieter moment, Sarithalin allowed herself to speak freely. "You make it look easier than it is," she said softly. He shrugged lightly, a faint smile on his face. "I make it look easier because I believe it is, not because it is, because it matters more than what anyone thinks." She felt warmth rise in her chest, the kind that came from being seen and accepted fully, without condition. It was foreign, almost frightening, but it was welcome. Their bond deepened further during a negotiation exercise meant to test ethical judgment. The task was simple in theory but complex in practice. Mediate a dispute where each side had equally valid claims, but neither was willing to compromise easily. Most participants approached it with rigid logic, citing rules and precedent. Sarathalin and Elias approached it differently. They listened first, asking questions to uncover hidden motivations. They highlighted common ground and offered solutions that honored both sides' concerns. When one party attempted to dominate, Elias spoke gently but firmly, ensuring their voices were heard without confrontation. By the conclusion, not only was a resolution reached, but it was elegant in its simplicity and fairness. Observers recorded notes with terms like innovative, unexpected, and effective. The whispers that had followed them before began to change. Some were impressed, some intrigued. The concept of humans as adaptable, resilient partners began to gain traction. Not all reactions were positive. A faction of the Velari continued to question Sarathalin's judgment. One senior official privately warned her that relying on a human was risky, that the species lacked understanding of complex interstellar politics, and that a failed union could bring dishonor. Sarathalin considered the words carefully. "Perhaps," she said finally, "but I see strength in his differences. Perhaps it is not conformity that saves us but adaptability." Elias watched her, his gaze steady. "Strength comes in many forms," he said. "Sometimes it is quiet, sometimes it is loud. Sometimes it is about surviving. Sometimes it is about standing beside someone else when they need you." That evening, as the artificial night fell over the conquered station, they walked along the observation deck. Stars stretched infinitely beyond the glass walls, their light filtered through the station's atmosphere. For Sarathalin, it was beautiful but secondary to the human beside her. Elias spoke quietly of his homeworld, of quiet winds, open skies, and soil rich with life. She listened, fascinated not only by the words but by the calm certainty in which he spoke them. "Do you ever regret your service?" she asked softly. He paused. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But regret does not erase what we gain. It teaches us what we value. I value the people I choose to stand beside. That includes you." Her chest tightened. She had expected pity, fear, or hesitation, but not this: clarity, resolve, and choice. In that moment, she realized something she had long forgotten: the power of being fully seen and fully accepted. Their final challenge came quickly. The Conquered announced a test of emotional endurance, designed to assess not only their skills but their bond under stress. They were presented with scenarios that simulated moral dilemmas, potential crises, and unexpected failures. Others faltered under pressure, reacting with fear or confusion. Sarathalin and Elias did not. They communicated, adapted, and supported each other, demonstrating the strength of mutual trust. Observers noted the difference immediately. Whereas most species relied on protocol, rigid rules, or personal authority, the human Velari pair relied on collaboration, empathy, and mutual understanding. It was effective, elegant, and profoundly human. When the evaluations concluded, the council withdrew to deliberate. For the first time, Sarathalin and Elias experienced a moment of genuine anticipation. Every cycle, every gesture, every conversation had been scrutinized. The galaxy had watched closely, some skeptical, some intrigued, all curious. Now they would wait for judgment. During that time, Sarathalin allowed herself to relax slightly, leaning against Elias as they stood in the observation chamber. The stars outside were constant, a reminder that no matter the judgment of others, life continued, vast and enduring. He looked at her calm and resolute. "Whatever happens," he said, "we do not fail by trying honestly. That is the only measure that matters." She met his gaze, feeling a strength that was both comforting and exhilarating. "I am beginning to believe that," she said softly. And in that quiet moment, as the galaxy held its collective breath, Sarathalin realized that the greatest challenge had never been surviving war or injury or isolation. The challenge had been allowing herself to trust, to hope, and to accept the choice of another being fully. Elias had chosen her, not out of pity, not out of obligation, but out of recognition, respect, and unwavering resolve. And in choosing her, he had reshaped the way she saw herself. For the first time in her long life, she allowed herself to imagine a future not defined by scars, judgment, or survival, but by partnership, trust, and the quiet power of human choice. The galaxy waited for the Council's decision, but Sarathalin no longer waited with fear. She waited with Elias beside her, knowing that whatever came next, they had already proven something greater than protocol, judgment, or expectation. They had proven that adaptation, trust, and unwavering choice could change not only their own lives, but the hearts and minds of those who dared to watch. The day the conquered council announced its decision was unlike any other. The station's corridors were alive with quiet anticipation. Diplomats and observers from multiple species moved carefully, their whispers echoing softly against polished walls. Every glance, every gesture, every footstep carried meaning. Sarathalin and Elias walked together, their presence calm but resolute, as if the galaxy's scrutiny mattered little compared to the trust they had built over cycles of trials, discussions, and shared experiences. For Sarathalin, the anticipation was almost unbearable. She had survived battles, lost comrades, endured injury and exile, and faced the judgment of her own people. Yet this moment, quiet and formal, felt heavier than all the trials of war. It was not physical danger that pressed on her chest, but the weight of expectation, the unknown. She felt Elias' hand brush briefly against hers, a small reminder that she was not facing this alone. They entered the council chamber together. The room was vast, circular, and filled with representatives seated in tiers that rose like steps to the ceiling. The lighting was soft, almost reverent, illuminating every face. At the center, the senior members of the council sat in deliberate silence. Their expressions were unreadable, their posture formal, yet Sarathalin could sense their attention focused entirely on her and Elias. Elias stood beside her quietly, his posture relaxed, though his eyes were alert. He gave her no unnecessary comfort, no false reassurances. His confidence was not in defiance but in clarity. They had faced every trial together, adapted to every test, and endured scrutiny that would have broken most individuals. Now, they simply waited. The council's spokesperson, a tall Velari with eyes that reflected calm judgment, rose to address the assembly. Sarathalin of the Velari and Elias Ward of Humanity have completed the required evaluations set forth by the conquered. Their union has been observed through multiple cycles, tested in both public and private scenarios. The results are not solely of their actions, but of what those actions reveal about their character, their species, and the possibilities of interstellar cooperation. A hush fell over the chamber. Sarathalin's heart beat rapidly. She felt her synthetic arm tighten slightly, a reflexive response to tension, but Elia's steady gaze reminded her to breathe. The Council has considered the challenges they faced: physical coordination, moral judgment, cultural adaptation, and social scrutiny. Observers have noted that despite differences in physiology, culture, and life experience, both individuals have demonstrated extraordinary qualities. These qualities include trust, patience, adaptability, and a capacity for empathy that surpasses protocol or expectation. Some diplomats shifted in their seats. A few younger representatives whispered to each other, intrigued. Many older members remained still, their expressions unreadable. The spokesperson continued. While the Union is unconventional by many standards, and while it challenges long-held assumptions about interspecies relationships, the Council finds that neither protocol nor tradition should obstruct the demonstrated strength of character and mutual choice exhibited by Sarathalin and Elias. Sarathalin felt her chest tighten with emotion, relief, pride, fear. She could not distinguish one from the other, All she knew was that the weight pressing on her heart began to lift. The Council hereby approves the union of Sarathalin of the Velari and Elia's ward of humanity, not as an exception, but as recognition that genuine partnership, respect, and trust may transcend tradition and expectation. Let this decision serve as precedent for future unions, not as a restriction, but as an example of what is possible when beings choose each other freely and with integrity. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Some representatives nodded quietly, accepting the judgment. Others whispered uncertainly, their expectations challenged. Sarathalin felt Elia squeeze her hand lightly, a subtle reminder that their bond had survived far more than this ceremonial announcement. After the formalities concluded, they were led to a private space to speak freely for the first time in the presence of the council. Here, the weight of observation was lifted, replaced by the warmth of human and Velari companionship. Sarathalin finally allowed herself to release the tension she had carried for cycles. "I never imagined this day," she said softly, her voice tinged with disbelief. "Not because I doubted myself, but because I never believed someone like you would choose me." Elias smiled, the kind of smile that carried calm certainty. "I did not choose you because of what others expected or feared. I chose you because of who you are. That is enough." Her chest warmed with a mixture of admiration and relief. For years she had survived and achieved, yet she had always felt incomplete. Now in his presence, she realized that what she had been missing was recognition, not validation, someone who saw her for her choices, her resilience, and her truth. In the following cycles, news of their union spread quietly at first, then with growing interest. Analysts of multiple species studied the implications. Humans, once considered unpredictable and untested in interstellar society, were now recognized for a unique strength: the ability to adapt, to commit, and to form bonds that were deliberate, resilient, and unshakable. Velari scholars debated the impact of the union, noting that emotional courage could influence diplomacy and cooperation far more effectively than strict adherence to tradition. Sarathalin, for her part, returned to her diplomatic duties with renewed purpose. Her interactions carried a subtle shift, confidence and clarity born not only of experience but of mutual trust. Her colleagues, once wary, began to regard her differently. Even those who had expressed skepticism now approached with curiosity, some even seeking her insight. Elias accompanied her where protocol allowed, often quietly observing, occasionally participating with a calm authority that was uniquely human. He did not dominate discussions or impose his perspective, but his presence subtly influenced the dynamics. Observers noted that his partnership with Sarathalin fostered innovation, cooperation, and empathy that had been absent in similar settings before. Over time, their private moments became as meaningful as the public ones. They shared discussions about their respective histories, their hopes, and the lives they wanted to build together. Sarathalin revealed experiences from the war she had never spoken aloud, moments of fear, courage, and unexpected compassion. Elias listened without judgment, offering insights shaped by his own survival and reflection. One evening, as they stood on the observation deck watching distant stars, Sarathalin spoke softly. "I used to believe that survival alone defined worth, that scars and injuries marked failure, but now I understand that strength is more than perfection. It is choice, trust, and the willingness to face fear alongside another." Elias nodded. "Humans call it commitment. It is the courage to choose someone again and again, not because it is easy, but because it is right. You have shown me what that means in ways I never expected." For the first time, Sarathalin felt the full weight of peace, a quiet, steady reassurance that extended beyond the battlefield, beyond protocol, and beyond the expectations of others. She realized that the trials had not only tested them, but had transformed her understanding of value, courage, and partnership. As months passed, small changes rippled through conquered society. Diplomats and citizens alike began to reconsider rigid assumptions about compatibility, worth, and the meaning of union. Discussions of emotional intelligence, adaptability, and mutual choice began to appear alongside traditional metrics of status, wealth, and power. Human qualities, resilience, empathy, and steadfast choice, gained recognition as strengths, not anomalies. Sarathalin found herself teaching, mentoring, and sharing insights with others who had faced adversity or skepticism. She spoke openly about survival, choice, and trust, emphasizing that scars, physical or emotional, were evidence of endurance, not failure. She credited Elias quietly, acknowledging that their partnership had revealed possibilities that tradition alone could not show. Elias, meanwhile, adapted to interstellar society without sacrificing himself. He engaged with others respectfully, shared his perspective calmly, and continued to demonstrate that humans could not only survive but influence and inspire. Together, they became a living example of the power of collaboration, mutual respect, and choice. The story of their union inspired young Velari and humans alike. Those who had doubted themselves or their potential began to see new possibilities. They understood that survival, courage, and choice were intertwined, that imperfections could be strengths, and that alliances built on trust could change expectations far more than those enforced by tradition or fear. Years later, as they stood together on a distant world far from the political centers of the conquered, Sarathalin reflected on everything that had transpired. The scars she had once seen as shame now reminded her of victories, survival, and resilience. Elia's presence reminded her daily of the courage inherent in choosing someone fully, without hesitation or expectation. The stars stretched endlessly above them, silent witnesses to lives transformed not by conquest, status, or perfection, but by empathy, trust, and human courage. Sarathalin looked at Elias, her heart steady and sure. "We changed more than our own lives," she said softly. He smiled, hand brushing hers. "We changed the way the galaxy sees choice, partnership, and strength, not through force but through commitment, not through perfection but through trust." They stood together, facing the vast unknown, not as individuals bearing scars and fear, but as partners who had chosen each other, who had endured scrutiny, and who had reshaped understanding in a galaxy that once doubted them. In that quiet moment, Sarathalin realized something profound. Survival had brought her here, yes, but it was trust, choice, and unwavering human courage that allowed her to thrive. And in the presence of Elias, she understood the greatest truth she had learned across cycles of war, scrutiny, and expectation. Being fully seen and fully chosen was a power stronger than any weapon, rule, or tradition. The conquered council's approval was not the conclusion of their journey. It was the acknowledgement of something far greater, a precedent for a galaxy learning to value courage, empathy, and human choice above fear, assumption, and rigid tradition. And as they stood together, watching distant suns flicker across the void, they knew one truth beyond all else. They had faced the galaxy, its judgment, and its expectations, and they had won, not by fighting the universe, but by standing together. Their story, marked by endurance, choice, and trust, would be remembered not for the scars they bore, but for the courage that defined them. Humanity had answered its first test in the wider galaxy, not with power nor conquest, but with empathy, commitment, and unwavering presence. And in that, the Velari and all other species would come to understand that some of the strongest forces in the universe were not technology or policy, but trust, adaptation, and the decision to choose one another against all odds. Sarathalin felt the weight of cycles lift from her shoulders. Beside her, Elias exhaled softly, the quiet sign of someone who had seen conflict, challenge, and endurance, and now peace. Together, they turned toward the stars, unafraid, unbroken, and ready for whatever new cycles awaited, confident that the galaxy had witnessed something extraordinary. The simple, unshakable power of two beings choosing each other fully, without condition, and with unwavering courage. And in that choice, humanity and the Velari had found a new way forward.